AITA for refusing to lend my brother money after he borrowed from me several times and never paid me back. So some background. I, 29F, have a brother, 27M, who I've always been close to. Growing up, we were typical siblings, arguing, laughing, but always having each other's backs when it mattered. He's always been a little bit of a free spirit, and I've tried to support him when he needed it. Over the years, this has included helping him out financially. I make a decent salary, so I've been in a position to assist him a few times when he hit a rough patch. I don't mind helping, as I see it as part of family support. However, things have gotten out of hand, and I'm starting to feel taken advantage of. Let me explain. About 2 years ago, my brother moved to a new city for a job opportunity. It was a great chance for him, but he was really struggling to adjust, both financially and emotionally. I lent him $1,000 to help with rent and bills until his paycheck came through. He was really grateful and promised he would pay me back as soon as he could. No problem. I was happy to help. Time passed, and he didn't mention paying me back. When I brought it up 6 months later, he said he just didn't have the money and that he was living paycheck to paycheck. I understood, but I also thought it was odd that he never even tried to pay me back, considering he seemed to be spending money on other things. It wasn't like he was starving or unable to buy himself some luxuries. I let it go because I didn't want to push him too hard. Then a year ago, things got worse. He came to me again for help, this time asking for $2,500. He said his car had broken down, and he couldn't get to work without it. I agreed, but only under the condition that he would pay me back in full within a year, and I would hold him to that. He was once again extremely grateful, and we signed an informal agreement where he promised to return the money by the end of the year. Well, a year came and went, and I still haven't seen a dime. When I asked him about it, he acted like he didn't even remember making that promise. He claimed that his life was still in chaos and that he was really struggling. He also mentioned that he had other bills and couldn't afford to pay me back, despite the fact that he had recently bought a new gaming console, some fancy gadgets, and gone on a couple of weekend trips. The whole situation started to feel incredibly disrespectful. I confronted him about it, and he got defensive. He said I was being unfair, that I should have known better than to expect him to pay back such a large sum, and that I should just consider the money a gift. I was shocked. When I asked why he thought it was okay to take money from me and never give it back, he said he didn't feel like he owed me anything because we're family. He even suggested I should be happy to help him out. I told him that it was different. When I helped him, I was doing it with the expectation that I would be paid back, especially after all the promises. He didn't take kindly to that. Fast forward to a couple of months ago. He called me again, this time for $4,000. His rent was overdue, and he was facing a possible eviction if he didn't pay. I knew he was still living paycheck to paycheck, but I also knew he had been making some questionable financial decisions, like upgrading his phone when his old one was perfectly fine, splurging on expensive clothes, and eating out constantly. I told him I couldn't lend him any more money. He was furious. He started calling me selfish and cold-hearted, claiming that if I truly cared about him, I would help him out. He said I had no right to act like I was above him because I had money while he was struggling. I explained that I've helped him in the past, but I can't keep enabling his behavior. I told him that if he wanted to get his life together, he needed to take responsibility for his finances and stop relying on me. He told me that I didn't understand what it was like to be him, and that I was privileged and out of touch. He said I was holding his past mistakes over his head, and that wasn't fair. I pointed out that this wasn't about his past mistakes. It was about the fact that he had never once repaid me, despite multiple promises. I told him I was done enabling him. Since then, he hasn't spoken to me much. Our relationship has become pretty strained. My parents are upset with me because they think I should just lend him the money to avoid further conflict in the family. They say I'm being too rigid and that I should just forgive the past debts. They even tried to guilt-trip me, saying that if I don't help him, I'll be the one who ruins his life. I've tried explaining that this isn't about being vindictive. This is about me setting boundaries and not letting him continue to take advantage of me. I know my brother is struggling, but I feel like he's learned nothing from the help I've already given him. He's shown no real effort to better manage his finances or make any long-term changes to his behavior. I'm afraid that if I give him more money, he'll just end up back in the same situation again, and I'll be stuck with the same broken promises. But at the same time, I feel guilty for not helping him, and I'm worried that this rift will permanently damage our relationship. So, AITA for refusing to lend him any more money? Should I have just helped him out and ignored the past? Or am I right to stand firm and demand that he take responsibility for his own life? Please be honest, I'm really torn about this. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more awesome videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. Thanks for your support. AITA for telling my sister she can't use my house for her new business. So a bit of backstory here. I, 28M, have a house in a nice neighborhood that I worked really hard to buy. I was able to get it with my savings and a bit of help from my parents, but mostly it's all mine. I have lived here for about 3 years, and while it's not huge, it's exactly what I need. It's been a nice space for me, and I put a lot of effort into making it cozy and comfortable. Now my sister, Emily, 30F, has always had an entrepreneurial streak. Ever since we were kids, she's always been the one with a great idea for a business, but none of them ever seemed to work out. A few months ago, she came to me with what she called her big break. She had started a small business selling homemade skincare products and was looking for a place to set up her studio because she had outgrown her apartment. At first, I didn't really think it was a big deal, but after talking to her, I realized she was serious. She wanted to use my house as the location for her new business. The plan was for her to set up a production space in my spare room and keep her products and equipment there. She promised it would only take up a small corner of the room and that it would be a temporary arrangement until she could afford her own space. She even offered to pay me a little rent for using the space. At first, I felt bad saying no. She was really excited about the business, and I could tell it meant a lot to her. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't a good idea for a number of reasons. First off, I'm not comfortable with having a bunch of products and supplies in my house. I like things clean and organized, and I'm not sure how that would work if she was running a business from my spare room. I also wasn't sure how she would handle the business side of things. Emily has never been great at keeping up with things like finances, schedules, and maintenance, and I didn't want her to run into issues that could end up affecting me. I also have to be honest. I enjoy the peace and privacy of my home, and the thought of having her there all the time felt like it would invade that. I also thought about the legal side of things. What if something went wrong with her products? What if they caused someone an allergic reaction or got her in trouble with regulations? My name would be attached to that property, and I didn't want to be liable for any of it. So I told her I wasn't comfortable with the idea and that I didn't want her using my house for her business. I tried to explain my reasons calmly, but she got really upset. She accused me of not supporting her dreams and being selfish, and that hit me hard. I always try to be there for her when she needs help, but in this case, I just couldn't go along with it. After the conversation, she didn't speak to me for a couple of days. Then, she started texting me, asking me to reconsider. She said I was being unreasonable and that I should at least let her use the space temporarily while she got her business off the ground. She even offered to pay me more rent, but I still said no. Things have gotten awkward since then. Our parents are now involved, and they've been trying to convince me to let Emily use the space. They said I was being too harsh, that families should help each other out, and that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for her. I feel bad because I know they want to see her succeed, but I just don't feel right about it. The situation has also caused tension between Emily and me. We've always had a close relationship, but now it feels like there's a wall between us. She barely talks to me anymore, and when she does, it's always in a passive-aggressive way. The last time I saw her, she mentioned that it was so much easier for some people to get what they want, and must be nice to have things handed to you. I'm really struggling with this because I don't want to hurt her, but I also don't want to let her use my house for something I'm not comfortable with. I've helped her in other ways before, like loaning her money when she needed it or helping her with job applications. But this feels different. I think I've made the right decision, but I'm starting to second-guess myself. I don't want to be the reason her business fails, but I also don't think it's my responsibility to provide her with a space for it. So, AITA for telling my sister she can't use my house for her business? AITA for refusing to let my sister live with me after she sabotaged my career and constantly disrespects me? I, 31F, have an older sister, Natalie, 34F, who has always been a little difficult. We've never been super close, but we've managed to get along for the most part over the years. That being said, she has a tendency to make everything about herself, and she's never been great at taking responsibility for her actions. Recently, I've come to realize that she's not just a little hard to deal with, she's toxic, and I've had enough. Here's the story. A few years ago, I landed a job in a field I had been working hard to break into for a long time. It's a highly competitive industry, and it took me a lot of networking, hours of research, and internships to finally get my foot in the door. When I first got the job, I was ecstatic. My hard work had finally paid off, and I was excited to prove myself. Of course, Natalie wasn't thrilled for me. Instead of celebrating my success, she seemed annoyed by it. She constantly made snarky remarks about how lucky I was, or how I probably got the job because of connections rather than my actual abilities. It stung, but I tried to brush it off. We're family after all, and I figured it was just her jealousy getting the best of her. Then, things started to get worse. A year into my new job, Natalie had just been let go from hers. She had been working at a company for several years, but her attitude and lack of professionalism had finally caught up with her. She'd been reprimanded multiple times for showing up late, taking long lunches, and generally not meeting expectations. She'd never taken ownership of her mistakes, always blaming her boss or co-workers for her problems. When she lost her job, she was devastated, although, to be honest, I think she was more upset that she wouldn't be able to keep up appearances on social media. Anyway, when Natalie lost her job, she reached out to me for help. She asked if she could move in with me while she figured things out. At the time, I was living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment. I agreed, thinking it would only be temporary, and I could help her get back on her feet. She seemed genuinely remorseful for her behavior and promised that she would get a new job soon. But the moment she moved in, everything changed. First, she started getting more and more critical of me and my life. She would constantly make snide comments about my job, saying things like, "You're lucky you even have a job. Most people would kill for something like that." She acted as if I had done nothing to get to where I was. She also mocked my daily routine, saying I was too rigid and didn't know how to relax. She would come into my room uninvited, criticize how I organized my space, and even tell me how to decorate my apartment. I tried to let it slide. I figured she was just going through a tough time, and maybe her bitterness was a reflection of her own struggles. But then things started to escalate. A couple of months after she moved in, I had an important presentation at work. It was my chance to make a strong impression on some higher-ups and potentially move up in the company. I had been working on it for weeks, and I was nervous but excited. The night before the presentation, I stayed up late preparing, going over my notes and practicing my speech. When I finally went to bed, I was exhausted but confident. That's when Natalie decided to throw a party. She had invited a few friends over without asking me first. I didn't even know until I came out of my room in the evening to find the apartment full of people. They were loud, drinking, and playing music at full volume. I asked her to keep the noise down, since I had an important presentation the next day. She rolled her eyes and said, "You're such a buzzkill. It's just one night. Get over it." I couldn't believe it. I had told her in advance about my presentation, and she knew how important it was to me. But she didn't care. I ended up not getting much sleep that night. The next day, I felt exhausted and couldn't focus as well as I had hoped during my presentation. I could tell I didn't perform as well as I could have. And to make things worse, I overheard one of my colleagues say, "It's hard to take her seriously when she looks so out of it. Maybe she's just not cut out for this job." That really hurt. I didn't say anything to Natalie about it at first. I just kept it inside and tried to move on. But a few days later, I confronted her about what had happened. I explained how her actions had directly affected my career and how disrespectful it was for her to throw a party the night before such an important event for me. She barely even apologized. She said, "I didn't know it was that serious. You really need to relax. It's just work. It's not like your whole life depends on it." At that moment, I realized she wasn't just being careless. She was actively sabotaging me. She had always acted like my success was a threat to her, and I started to see how her behavior was actively undermining me, both personally and professionally. But that wasn't the worst part. Several months later, I found out that Natalie had been telling people in my circle that I was too uptight and that I needed to lighten up. She even spread a rumor at one of my family gatherings that I was always so focused on my career that I had no time for anything else. She made it sound like I was some kind of workaholic who had no balance in my life, which was far from the truth. I tried to talk to her about it, but she just laughed it off, saying, "You take everything so seriously. You need to stop being such a control freak." At this point, I knew I couldn't continue living with her. It wasn't just that she was making me uncomfortable. She was actively making my life more difficult. I asked her to move out, but she refused. She said I was being unreasonable and that I was ruining her life. She claimed I was being selfish, expecting her to leave just because she wasn't living up to my perfect standards. I told her that it wasn't about standards. It was about respect. I explained that I couldn't keep living in a space where I felt disrespected and constantly undermined. She said I was being a terrible sister and that I would regret this. Now, we're at an impasse. She's still living with me, and things have only gotten worse. Every day feels like a battle, and I feel like I'm being emotionally drained by her presence. My friends have told me that I'm being too harsh, but my gut tells me I'm just trying to protect myself from someone who constantly brings negativity into my life. So, AITA for refusing to let my sister live with me after everything that's happened? Should I just suck it up and let her stay? Or is it okay for me to draw the line and set boundaries for my own well-being? AITA for not letting my brother stay at my place after he kicked his girlfriend out? I, 29M, have a younger brother, Jake, 24M, who I've always been pretty close with. We're not best friends or anything, but we get along, and I try to support him when I can. Our parents always taught us to be there for each other, so when Jake called me last week, I didn't hesitate to pick up the phone. What I heard on the other end caught me completely off guard, though. Apparently, Jake and his girlfriend, Sophie, 23F, had been having issues for a while. He didn't get into specifics at first, but he told me that they'd been living together for about a year, and things weren't going well. He said that they had a huge argument, and he ended up telling her to leave. From what I gathered, it was a pretty heated argument, and Jake wasn't willing to back down. He told me he kicked her out of the apartment and that she wasn't welcome to return. I know Jake can be a bit hot-headed, but I never thought he would go this far. The next part of the conversation took me by surprise. Jake said that he had nowhere to go and needed a place to crash for a while. He explained that he was planning to move into a new place, but it wasn't ready yet, and he needed somewhere to stay until then. I was caught off guard because, while I've offered him a place to stay in the past, I wasn't sure if I was ready to let him stay at my place now, especially considering how things went down with Sophie. I've been living in my own apartment for a few years now, and while it's not huge, it's comfortable, and I've made it clear to friends and family that I value my space and my privacy. I've had a few friends crash here for a few nights, but nothing long-term. I'm not the kind of person who enjoys having house guests for extended periods, especially when things are complicated like this. But I didn't want to be heartless, so I agreed to let Jake stay for a few nights, just to give him time to figure things out. But as soon as Jake arrived, things started to feel off. I thought it would be a short visit, but it quickly became clear that he was expecting to stay for much longer than I had anticipated. I didn't want to bring it up right away because I didn't want to make him feel like I was kicking him out, but I was starting to get uncomfortable with the situation. He started talking about how he didn't want to go back to Sophie's place, and when I asked him why, he said that they were done for good and that he couldn't live with someone who was always nagging him. I asked him if he was planning to reconcile with her or if he had any intentions of working things out, and he gave me a vague answer. It sounded like he didn't really care about what happened between them anymore, but I could tell he was still upset and confused. It's not that I don't care about Jake or his relationship problems, but I was starting to feel like he was using my place as a crutch. He wasn't actively looking for a new place to stay, and he was spending a lot of time in my apartment without any clear plan for moving forward. I was also feeling uncomfortable because I knew I would have to deal with the awkwardness of him potentially being upset with me if I asked him to leave sooner than he expected. A few days into his stay, I had a conversation with him about setting some boundaries. I told him that I was happy to help him out temporarily, but I needed him to start making plans to find his own place. He said he didn't know where to start, and that he wasn't sure if he was ready to move on from the breakup yet. I understood that, but I also felt like he was just dragging his feet and not taking any initiative to get his life back on track. One night, I came home from work to find that Jake had invited some of his friends over. It wasn't a huge party, but there were 3 people in my living room, drinking beer and playing video games. I didn't mind the occasional guest, but this was different. He hadn't even asked me if it was okay to have people over, and I felt like he was treating my apartment like his own without respecting my space. I was frustrated, but decided to let it slide for the night. The next morning, I had a long conversation with Jake. I told him that while I was happy to help him temporarily, I couldn't keep living like this. I needed him to either start looking for a new place or come up with a concrete plan to move forward. He seemed annoyed and defensive, saying that I didn't understand what he was going through. He accused me of being unsympathetic and that I wasn't supporting him during a tough time. But honestly, I felt like I was being taken advantage of. I wasn't a free hotel or his safety net, and I didn't want him to get too comfortable living in my space without any real intentions of changing his situation. Things came to a head when he asked me if he could stay for another week. I told him no, and that he needed to figure something out before the end of the week. He got really upset and said that I was being a terrible brother, that I didn't care about him, and that I was kicking him out when he was at his lowest. He said that he had nowhere else to go, and that it wasn't fair of me to abandon him when he needed help the most. I felt guilty, but at the same time, I was exhausted from having him in my space without any real plans or effort to get his life back on track. I felt like he was using me to avoid dealing with his problems. After a lot of back and forth, he left my apartment in a huff. He's not speaking to me right now, and our parents are on his side, telling me that I should have been more understanding and that families should help each other out, no matter what. So, AITA for not letting my brother stay at my place longer and asking him to leave? AITA for kicking out my roommate after she went behind my back to borrow money from my parents? I, 27F, have had a close friendship with my roommate, Mia, 28F, for over 5 years. We met in college, and since then, we've always kept in touch. A couple of years ago, Mia and I decided to move in together after both of our previous living situations fell through. We've always been comfortable around each other, and I thought it would be a good fit. We've had our disagreements, but nothing that felt insurmountable, at least not until recently. Here's the issue. Over the past few months, Mia has been going through some financial struggles. She works part-time at a local cafe, but it's been hard for her to make ends meet. She's mentioned here and there that she's falling behind on rent and utilities, and she was really stressing about it. I try to be understanding, since I know how tough things can get, especially in a city with such high living costs. But when it started becoming a regular conversation, every few days almost I began to feel a bit uneasy. I tried to help where I could. A few times, I lent her small amounts of money for groceries or to cover part of the rent. It wasn't much, but I did it because I considered her a good friend, and I figured it was temporary. But when she started asking for more, like asking me to cover her share of the rent, which was over $700 a month, I began to feel a little overwhelmed. I explained to her that I could only help out to a certain point and that I couldn't afford to fully cover her costs, especially since I was already paying my own share. At this point, I started getting frustrated. Mia had been talking about trying to find another job for months, but nothing had come through. She'd been waiting for a better opportunity, but it didn't seem like she was really putting in the effort. She'd cancel interviews or pass on work opportunities that didn't align with what she wanted to do, even though her financial situation was getting worse by the week. One afternoon, Mia came to me and said she had a really important favor to ask. I figured she needed help with something minor, like another loan or help to cover a bill. But I was wrong. She told me that she'd gone behind my back and asked my parents for a loan. At first, I didn't fully understand what she meant, but then she explained that she'd asked them for $2,000 to cover her rent and bills. She said they'd agreed to help her, but she'd need to pay them back within 6 months. I was shocked, not only because she had asked my parents for money without asking me first, but also because I felt completely blindsided. I immediately asked her why she'd gone to them instead of me. She said she felt uncomfortable asking me for such a large amount, especially since I'd already helped her out before, and that she didn't want to burden me any further. I told her that I would have preferred to help her out or at least talk to my parents together, rather than her going behind my back. Mia got defensive and said that it wasn't a big deal and that they were happy to help her. I felt betrayed, not because she asked for help. If she had been upfront with me, I would have understood, but because she didn't even consider how it would affect me. My parents had never been overly involved in my finances, but they always knew about my living situation and my expenses. The fact that Mia had gone to them behind my back made me feel like she didn't trust me or value our friendship as much as I thought. When I confronted my parents, they acted like it was no big deal. They were more than willing to lend Mia the money and were confident that she would pay them back. I tried to explain how uncomfortable I felt about the whole situation, but they dismissed it, telling me that I was overreacting and that it was just a loan to help her out. That's when I decided to set a boundary. I told Mia that I couldn't continue living with her under these circumstances. It wasn't just the money, though that was a huge issue for me, but I felt like she had crossed a line by not being upfront with me about what she was doing. I was tired of feeling like I had to constantly step in to help her, especially when it seemed like she wasn't doing much to help herself. Mia was shocked when I told her I wanted her to move out. She begged me to reconsider, saying she didn't know who else to turn to for help. She promised she would be more responsible in the future, but I felt like it was too little too late. I've always been there for her, and I've tried to help her when I could, but I didn't want to continue enabling her behavior. I didn't want to be the person who constantly bailed her out, only for her to turn around and act like nothing was wrong. When I told her I needed her to move out, she got upset and said that I was being selfish and that I was throwing away a 5-year friendship over a misunderstanding. She claimed I was making it all about me, and that I should be happy my parents were helping her out. But I told her that I wasn't upset about the money. I was upset about the lack of transparency and the fact that she had gone behind my back to ask for a loan. I felt like it showed a lack of respect for our friendship and for me as a person. Since then, things have been tense. Mia moved out, and we haven't spoken much. She's reached out a couple of times, saying she feels hurt by my decision and that I was too harsh in kicking her out. I've had a few people tell me I should have been more understanding, but I don't think I could have been. I've tried to support her for years, and I felt like she took advantage of that. I don't want to feel like I have to carry her financial burdens anymore, especially when it feels like she's not doing enough to help herself. I know this is a complicated situation, and I'm still grappling with whether I made the right decision. On one hand, I feel like I stood up for myself and set a boundary that needed to be set. On the other hand, I feel guilty for ending our living situation, and maybe I should have been more patient or offered her a longer timeline to figure things out. So, AITA for kicking out my roommate after she went behind my back to borrow money from my parents? Am I being too hard on her, or did I have a right to stand my ground? AITA for not helping my brother financially after he got into serious debt, and then demanded that I pay for his mistake? So here's the situation. I, 30M, have a younger brother, Aaron, 27M, who I've always been very close with. Growing up, we were inseparable. He was the kind of person who would always come to me for advice or help, and I did my best to support him in any way I could. Over the years, though, our relationship has become increasingly strained, mainly due to his poor financial decisions and the fact that he keeps asking me for help, even though it's clear that he isn't learning from his mistakes. A few months ago, Aaron reached out to me in a panic. He had gotten himself into serious debt like credit card debt, personal loans, and even payday loans. He told me that he couldn't make his payments anymore and that his credit was ruined. He asked me for help, saying that he was barely getting by and didn't know how he would make it through. This wasn't the first time he'd been in financial trouble, but this time, it seemed worse. He had been living beyond his means for a while, constantly buying things he couldn't afford, gadgets, clothes, dining out, and even taking vacations that were way outside of his budget. I listened to him and tried to be understanding. I could tell he was genuinely stressed, and I knew he needed help. But I also knew that giving him money wouldn't solve the root of the problem. I had helped him out before, loaning him money for rent, paying off small bills, and covering some of his emergencies, but I was starting to feel like he wasn't making any effort to get his finances in order. Every time I helped, he promised that things would change, but they never did. I had seen firsthand how he kept making the same mistakes without ever learning from them, and I knew it wasn't sustainable for me to keep bailing him out. I explained all of this to Aaron when he called me. I told him that I couldn't keep enabling his behavior by giving him money every time he got into trouble. I suggested that he look into debt consolidation or speak to a financial advisor to help him manage his situation. I also told him that he needed to take responsibility for his actions and figure out a plan to improve his financial habits. He was really upset and tried to convince me that I was being harsh, saying that I was his brother and should help him out, especially since I was doing better financially. It was tough, but I stood my ground. I told him that I loved him and wanted the best for him, but that I couldn't keep giving him money. I said that sometimes people need to hit rock bottom before they can make meaningful changes in their lives. He wasn't happy with my response, but I thought I had made the right decision. He hung up on me, and I thought that would be the end of it. However, a few weeks later, I got a call from our parents. Apparently, Aaron had gone behind my back and asked them for money. They were conflicted about it, but they ultimately decided to lend him $5,000 to help cover his debts. I was upset when I found out, mainly because I had already told him no, and I didn't appreciate him going around me to get the money. Our parents are in their 60s and are not well off. They work hard to make ends meet, and I know that they have their own financial pressures to deal with. So for Aaron to ask them for such a large amount of money felt irresponsible and unfair. I called Aaron to confront him about it. I asked him why he went to our parents after I told him I couldn't help him. He said that he didn't want to be a burden to me anymore and that he thought our parents would be more understanding. I was furious. I explained to him that our parents were not a bottomless pit of resources and that he shouldn't be asking them for money just because they're family. I also reminded him that I had offered him advice and that I had tried to help him in the past, but he wasn't taking it seriously. He accused me of being selfish and not caring about him. He said I was just like everyone else who only cared about money and not about family. I told him that I was done enabling his behavior, and I wasn't going to let him manipulate me or our parents into giving him money. He needed to take accountability for his own actions and stop relying on others to fix his problems. He didn't take kindly to that and told me I was being a jerk for not supporting him when he needed it the most. A few days later, Aaron started pressuring me again. This time, he came to me and asked if I could help him pay back our parents. He said that he would never be able to pay them back on his own, and he asked if I could chip in so that they didn't have to bear the entire burden. He suggested that I should help him just this once so that he could get back on his feet. I told him again that I couldn't do it. I said that it wasn't just about the money. It was about the fact that he needed to learn to manage his finances and take responsibility for the mess he created. I also reminded him that I had already given him money in the past, and I couldn't keep doing it indefinitely. He got angry and said that I was being unreasonable and that I had no idea what it was like to be in his situation. He told me that I had the money to help, so I should just do it, and that I was being selfish by refusing. At that point, I lost my patience. I told him that I wasn't going to keep bailing him out of every situation he created. I said that I was tired of being the bank for his poor financial decisions, and that if he didn't want to change, then I wasn't going to be part of his problem anymore. I told him to figure it out on his own and to stop expecting me or our parents to clean up his mess. We haven't spoken since that argument. Our parents are trying to stay out of it, but I can tell they're disappointed in me. They've said that I'm being too hard on Aaron and that I should just help him out because he's family. They keep reminding me that he's struggling and that it's my job to help him. But I feel like I've done enough. Every time I've helped him, nothing changes. He always ends up back in the same situation, asking for more money. And at this point, I'm exhausted. I feel like I'm being used, and I don't want to enable his behavior any longer. So, AITA for not helping my brother pay back his debts and for refusing to lend him more money? Should I have just given in and helped him? Or am I right to draw the line and let him take responsibility for his own actions? AITA for refusing to let my parents visit my house after they moved into the neighborhood? I, 32M, recently bought a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It's been a big step for me, and I've worked hard to make it a place that reflects my style and needs. The house is in a great location, and I've really enjoyed the sense of peace and privacy it provides. I'm also just a couple of blocks away from my parents, who live in an area that's become more desirable in recent years. While I'm happy that my parents have a home close by, things have become complicated after they decided to move into the same neighborhood. Now, I've always had a decent relationship with my parents. We talk often, and I make a point to visit them every few weeks. However, I've never really been one to invite them over to my space all the time. I'm the type of person who enjoys having my own space and doesn't like feeling like I'm constantly entertaining. So when they moved in nearby, I was a bit concerned about what it would mean for my personal space and boundaries. At first, it seemed like they were respecting my privacy. My mom would occasionally drop by with little treats like baked goods or a plant, but I didn't mind that. It felt more like a gesture of goodwill rather than an invasion. But then things began to escalate. About 2 months after they moved in, my parents started showing up at my house unannounced. They'd knock on the door or ring the bell, expecting to be let in. At first, I didn't mind too much, but as it became more frequent, I started feeling frustrated. I'm an adult with my own routine and obligations, and I didn't want to feel like I had to open the door every time they decided to drop by. I value my privacy, and I started to feel overwhelmed by the constant visits. I politely asked them to give me a heads up before coming over, so I could make sure I was available. I explained that I didn't want them to think I was avoiding them, but that I needed to maintain some boundaries and be able to enjoy my home without interruptions. They seemed to understand at first, and for a while, things went back to normal. But then, a few weeks later, my mom sent me a text message asking if she could come by to see how things were going and spend some time with me. She mentioned that she had noticed I was working a lot and thought it would be nice for us to catch up. I thought about it for a minute and replied that I had a pretty busy schedule and wasn't really in the mood for a visit. I made it clear that I would see her the following weekend, which we had already planned. She didn't take it well. Later that day, I got a call from my dad. He was upset, saying that my mom had been disappointed by my response and that I was being rude. He said that family was important and that I needed to prioritize spending time with them now that they were so close. He also mentioned that my mom felt like I was shutting her out and that she was just trying to stay connected with me. He reminded me that they had moved nearby to be closer to me and that I shouldn't make them feel unwelcome. This conversation really threw me off. I wasn't trying to shut anyone out, but I was starting to feel like my parents expected to be a bigger part of my daily life than I was comfortable with. I'm grateful that they're nearby and that I can see them more often, but I still want to maintain some level of independence and privacy in my home. I tried to explain that to my dad, but he wasn't having it. He said that if I wanted them to feel welcome, I should make an effort to have them over more often, especially since they were making the effort to be close by. I got the sense that my parents felt entitled to be involved in my life at all times because they had moved nearby, and that really didn't sit well with me. After that conversation, things took a turn. My parents began showing up more frequently, sometimes even just knocking on the door without any prior notice. It was as if they had taken it upon themselves to come by and check in, expecting me to let them in and spend time with them. It was beginning to feel less like a casual visit and more like an obligation. The last straw for me was when I was having a friend over for dinner one evening. I had planned the evening carefully, wanting to relax and enjoy the night without any distractions. Just as we were sitting down to eat, my mom showed up at the door unannounced, asking if she could come in and see how I was doing. I was shocked. This was the third time that week she had come over without any prior notice. I explained to her, as politely as I could, that I was in the middle of a dinner with a friend and that I wasn't available at that moment. She didn't take it well, and before I could say anything more, she turned and left without another word. The next day, I received a message from both my parents, telling me that they felt hurt and that I had been acting distant. They said that they had made the effort to be close to me by moving into the neighborhood, but I was making them feel unwelcome. They accused me of not appreciating their presence in my life, and I could sense some guilt tripping in the message. I felt cornered. After giving it some thought, I decided to take a stand. I told them that while I appreciated that they had moved nearby and that I wanted to maintain a good relationship with them, I wasn't okay with them showing up at my house whenever they felt like it. I told them that I needed them to respect my boundaries and to schedule visits in advance, just like I would do with any other guest. I explained that I loved them and wanted to spend time with them, but I also needed to have space in my life, and I felt overwhelmed by their unannounced visits. That conversation didn't go well either. My parents were both upset, and they said that I was being unreasonable and that family should be able to come over anytime, especially when they live so close. They said that they had given up a lot to be closer to me and that I was pushing them away. So now we're in a tense situation. My parents haven't come by in a couple of weeks, and we've only been in touch through texts. I feel bad because I know they want to be close to me, but I also feel like my need for privacy and independence should be respected. I've been second-guessing myself, wondering if I'm being too harsh or if I'm in the wrong for setting boundaries with my parents. Am I overreacting, or is it reasonable to ask them to respect my space? So, AITA for refusing to let my parents visit my house whenever they want after they moved into the neighborhood. AITA for kicking my sister out of my house after she brought her kids over without asking. I, 30M, have a pretty close relationship with my sister, Rebecca, 33F. We grew up together, and while we've had our differences over the years, we've generally been supportive of each other. Rebecca has 2 kids, a 6-year-old boy and a 3-year-old girl, who I love to spend time with. I don't see them as much as I'd like because we live about an hour apart, but when I do, I enjoy their company. I'm not exactly the parenting type, but I'm a good uncle, and I make the effort when I can. A few weeks ago, Rebecca called me and said she needed some help. Her husband, Tom, was out of town for work, and she had some appointments she needed to go to that she couldn't reschedule. She explained that she had no one to watch the kids and asked if she could drop them off at my house for a few hours. She made it clear that it would only be for the afternoon and that she would pick them up before dinner. I agreed because I didn't mind helping out, and I thought it would be a nice chance to bond with my niece and nephew. The first few hours went fine. The kids were excited to be in my place, and I tried to entertain them as best I could. I even made lunch for them and played a few games, which was fun. But as the afternoon wore on, things started to get a bit chaotic. They were running around, getting into things, and causing a bit of a mess. I wasn't annoyed, but I definitely felt out of my comfort zone. I don't have kids of my own, and my apartment is not set up for 2 young children to run around in. It's not big, and I don't have a lot of space for toys or childproofing, so I was trying to keep things from getting out of hand. Around 4 p.m., I started texting Rebecca to ask when she would be coming to pick them up. She didn't respond right away, so I called her, but she didn't pick up. I left a voicemail, but still no response. I figured she was just busy, but as it got closer to 6 p.m., I started to get frustrated. The kids were starting to get tired and cranky, and I was getting exhausted trying to keep them entertained. At this point, I had no idea when they were going to leave, and I was beginning to feel a little overwhelmed. Finally, around 7 p.m., I got a text from Rebecca saying that she was running late and that she would be another 45 minutes. I was annoyed by this point, as it had already been much longer than expected. I responded, saying that I was fine to wait, but that I didn't want to be left alone with them any longer than necessary. I wasn't mad at the kids, but I was frustrated that my sister had essentially dumped them at my house without checking in regularly or making sure that I was okay with the extended visit. When she finally showed up around 7:30, the kids were in full meltdown mode. They were hungry, tired, and just generally out of sorts. I had done my best to keep them entertained, but by this point, I was beyond ready for them to go. I made a comment to Rebecca about how long it had taken for her to pick them up, and she apologized but seemed more concerned with the kids' moods than my own. Over the next few days, I didn't think much of it until Rebecca called me again. She said that she needed help watching the kids again, as she had a family emergency and needed to be gone for a few hours. She explained that Tom was still out of town and she had no one else to help. This time, she didn't even ask me directly if I could help. She just told me that I would be watching the kids again. It rubbed me the wrong way, and I was immediately put off. I told her that I wasn't comfortable with her, just assuming I would be available to babysit at the drop of a hat. I explained that I had plans for that day, and while I was happy to help out in an emergency, I wasn't going to be treated like her personal child care provider. I also reminded her that the last time she left the kids with me for an extended period, it was more than I was prepared for, and I felt like she wasn't respecting my time or my boundaries. Rebecca got defensive and said that I was overreacting. She told me that I shouldn't be complaining because I was family and that I should be more willing to help out when she needed it. She said that she would never ask anyone else to help like this, and I was being selfish for not offering to watch the kids again. She also accused me of not being a good uncle because I wasn't willing to help her in her time of need. I told her that I wasn't trying to be a bad uncle, but that I had to prioritize my own life and responsibilities too. I told her that I was willing to help when I could, but I didn't want to be taken advantage of, and I didn't like how she was acting like I had no right to set boundaries. I said that I didn't want to argue about it, but that I couldn't agree to watch her kids again unless we had a clear understanding about my time and limits. Rebecca didn't take this well at all. She started accusing me of being a bad brother and selfish. She said that I was making her feel guilty for asking for help, and that I was acting like she was an inconvenience. She said that if I couldn't help her, then I clearly didn't care about her or her kids, and that I was being completely unreasonable. That's when things escalated. Rebecca called me and said that she was done asking me for help and that she would never ask me again. She said that she didn't want anything to do with me if I couldn't be supportive of her and her family. I told her that I didn't want things to get that far, but I wasn't going to apologize for wanting my own space and setting boundaries. The conversation ended with her hanging up on me, and I haven't heard from her since. My parents called a few days later, saying that Rebecca was upset and wanted me to apologize. They said that I was being too harsh and that I should have just helped her out when she needed it. They said that family is supposed to support each other no matter what, and that I was being unreasonable by setting boundaries. So now, I'm stuck wondering if I'm the asshole for not being more flexible and for not just agreeing to help her again. I'm still frustrated by how she treated me during the last visit, and I'm not sure if I'm being too strict with my boundaries. I don't want to lose my relationship with my sister over this, but I also don't think I should have to constantly put my life on hold to help her out whenever it's convenient for her. So, AITA for kicking my sister out of my house after she brought her kids over without asking? Hey friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what could be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. AITA for kicking out my roommate after I found out she had been stealing from me? I, 26F, have been living with my roommate, Leah, 25F, for about a year now. We met through a mutual friend, and we hit it off pretty well. At first, everything was great. We got along, paid our bills on time, and generally had a good time together. However, over the past couple of months, things have started to go downhill, and I'm honestly starting to feel like I made a huge mistake living with her. So here's the situation. A few months ago, I started noticing small things going missing from my apartment. Items I would buy like snacks or toiletries, and even some of my clothes. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful. Maybe I ate the snacks and didn't remember, or maybe I left my clothes in the laundry room. But after a while, I started to realize that this wasn't the case. It wasn't just one or two things here and there. It was happening pretty consistently, and it wasn't just small things. A couple of times, I noticed my more expensive makeup products were gone, and once I even found a pair of shoes I had been saving for months to buy, mysteriously missing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, so I tried to dismiss it. Maybe I misplaced things. Maybe I was just overthinking it. But the tipping point came when I went to grab some cash I had left in my room for an emergency, and it was gone. I knew for a fact I had left it there, and I was pretty sure I hadn't taken it out recently. That was when I got suspicious. I didn't want to confront Leah without being sure, so I decided to do a little experiment. Over the next few weeks, I started keeping track of the things I thought were going missing. I made sure to keep my belongings in places where I could notice if they were touched. I didn't want to do anything drastic, so I just observed. Then one day, I caught her red-handed. I had been looking for a new set of kitchen knives I had bought a few months ago. I noticed one was missing, so I went into the kitchen, and there she was using the exact knife that had disappeared. When she saw me, she froze and immediately started acting all flustered, asking if I needed something. I told her that I had noticed some of my stuff was going missing, and I wanted to know if she had been taking it. She denied it at first, but I pushed her, and eventually she admitted to taking my things. She said she hadn't meant to steal from me, but that she had been borrowing things without asking because she didn't have money for her own stuff. She said she had been feeling embarrassed about asking me for help, so she just helped herself to whatever she needed. She even admitted to taking some of my cash at one point, which completely shocked me. I told her I was really hurt and that she had broken my trust. I tried to stay calm and rational, but I was honestly livid. I told her she needed to move out. I couldn't continue living with someone who had no respect for my boundaries or my belongings. She tried to convince me that it was just a few things and that she was sorry, but I wasn't buying it. I had always been respectful of her things, and I had always tried to create a good living environment. I didn't feel safe or comfortable in my own home anymore. She begged me to reconsider, saying she didn't have anywhere else to go and that she would pay me back for everything she took. I told her that wasn't the point. The trust had been broken, and I didn't want her in my space anymore. She kept saying she was sorry, but I told her that wasn't enough. She didn't get to just take things without asking and then expect everything to be fine. I also told her that I had no intention of waiting for her to pay me back because I didn't want to get tangled up in this mess any longer. She finally left, but the fallout wasn't over. After she moved out, I realized just how much damage had been done. I had to replace several things that she had taken, and it wasn't cheap. I also found out from our mutual friend that Leah had been talking badly about me behind my back, saying I was overreacting and being too uptight about the whole thing. Apparently, she had told some people that I had blown things out of proportion and that I should have been more understanding. According to her, I was making a big deal over a few items. At first, I was upset by the rumors, but then I realized that I didn't really care what she or anyone else thought. I had set a boundary, and I had to protect myself and my space. I don't think people really understand how hard it is to deal with a betrayal like that. I had trusted her, and she had taken advantage of that trust for her own benefit. It wasn't just about the stolen items. It was about the fact that she didn't even feel bad enough to ask for help or be upfront about her situation. Instead, she took from me without asking. A few weeks later, Leah tried to reach out and apologize again. She said she had learned her lesson and wanted to make amends. She said that she was going through a rough time and that she was sorry for taking advantage of me. She also offered to pay me back in installments for everything she had taken. But I didn't want to hear it anymore. I told her that I appreciated her apology, but that the damage was done and I wasn't interested in continuing our friendship. I didn't feel like I could trust her again, and I wasn't going to let her back into my life. Now my friends are split on this. Some think I did the right thing by kicking her out, saying that no one should tolerate someone who steals from them, regardless of the circumstances. Others say that I could have been more understanding of her situation, and that maybe I overreacted by asking her to leave so quickly. They think I should have tried to work it out, and that people make mistakes. So, AITA for kicking her out after finding out she had been stealing from me? Or was I too harsh by not giving her a second chance? AITA for refusing to let my brother move in with me after he lost his job and home? I, 29M, have a younger brother, Chris, 26M, who has always been a bit of a free spirit. He's never really had a steady job or long-term responsibilities, and it's been a source of tension between us for years. Growing up, I was the responsible one. I worked hard in school, got a good job, and made sure I kept my life on track. Chris, on the other hand, always seemed to coast by, relying on other people to get by instead of making a real effort to be independent. Don't get me wrong, I care about him, and I've always tried to help him out when I could. There were times when he needed a place to crash after a bad breakup, or when he couldn't pay rent. I've always been there for him in those situations, but after a while it started to feel like I was constantly bailing him out, and I wasn't seeing any effort on his part to turn his life around. It was frustrating because I had worked hard to get where I am, and I couldn't understand why he wasn't doing the same. A couple of weeks ago, Chris called me in a panic. He told me that he had lost his job and, as a result, had fallen behind on his rent. He explained that he was about to be evicted from his apartment and had no place to go. I could hear the desperation in his voice, and he asked if he could move in with me until he got back on his feet. He promised it would only be temporary, just a couple of months, he said, and that he would help out around the house and look for a new job. I was torn. I didn't want to leave him out in the street, but I also knew that letting him move in would mean disrupting my life. My apartment is small, and I've always valued my privacy and independence. The idea of having him live with me again brought up a lot of old feelings of resentment. Every time he stayed with me in the past, it felt like he didn't respect my space, and I ended up doing most of the work, whether it was paying for groceries or cleaning up after him. I decided to be honest with him. I told him that I wasn't sure I could handle him moving in again. I explained that my living situation was already tight and that I needed my space. I also mentioned that I had my own responsibilities and couldn't afford to be his full-time caregiver. I told him that I would help him find a solution, but that I couldn't take him in. Chris wasn't happy with my response. He got upset and said that I was being selfish. He reminded me that I was his brother and that family was supposed to help each other out, especially in tough times. He told me that he had nowhere else to go and that if I didn't help him, he might end up homeless. He said that I had no idea how hard things had been for him and that he had been trying to get his life together, but things just hadn't worked out. I understood that things were hard for him, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that he was expecting me to clean up his mess again. I've helped him before, and every time it felt like I was enabling him rather than encouraging him to take responsibility for his own life. I told him that I wasn't comfortable with the idea of him moving in and that I needed some time to think about it. The next day, Chris showed up at my apartment unannounced. He was sitting on my doorstep when I opened the door, looking defeated. He told me that he had nowhere else to go and that he had tried calling friends, but no one was willing to take him in. He asked me again if he could stay with me. He was clearly upset, and I felt guilty seeing him like that, but I still didn't want to say yes. I stood firm, explaining once again that I couldn't take him in. I said that I was happy to help in other ways. Maybe I could help him find a new place to stay or connect him with people who could help, but that my apartment just wasn't an option. I also reiterated that I couldn't continue to bail him out every time something went wrong. He needed to start taking responsibility for his own life, and I couldn't be his safety net anymore. Chris broke down in front of me. He started crying, telling me that he didn't have anyone else and that I was the only family he had left who could help. He said that he had messed up, but he wanted to turn things around. He begged me to reconsider, telling me that this was the hardest thing he'd ever been through and that he didn't know what to do. I felt guilty, but I also knew that giving in would only make things worse in the long run. If I let him move in, I knew it would create tension in our relationship, and it would likely set a precedent where he thought he could always rely on me. I told him I couldn't let him stay, but that I would help him find resources, shelters, job opportunities, whatever he needed. Chris stormed off, furious with me. He sent me a message later saying that he was done with me and that he would figure things out on his own. He accused me of not caring about him and of being a bad brother. He said that I'd never understand what he was going through and that I was abandoning him in his time of need. I haven't heard from him since, and our parents have gotten involved. They're upset with me, saying that I should have helped him and that family is supposed to be there for each other. They've said that I'm being too hard on him and that I should have let him move in for a while until he got back on his feet. They've also told me that I should apologize to him and offer him a place to stay. I've tried to explain my side, but they're not really listening. I'm feeling torn. I want to help my brother, but I don't want to enable his behavior. I feel like if I let him move in, I'll be repeating the same cycle, and I'll end up resenting him even more. At the same time, I don't want to be the reason he's left without any support. So, AITA for refusing to let my brother move in with me after he lost his job and home. AITA for refusing to help my sister pay for her dog's surgery after she didn't take proper care of him. I, 29M, have a sister, Kelly, 26F, who has always been a bit of a free spirit. We've always had a good relationship, but she's not the most responsible person, especially when it comes to anything that requires long-term commitment. She moved out of our parents' house at 18, and since then, she's bounced around a few different jobs, moved to a few different cities, and generally avoided anything that felt too settled. About 2 years ago, she got a dog. I wasn't thrilled about it because I knew Kelly wasn't the type to settle into any kind of routine or stability. But she seemed excited, and I didn't want to be too harsh. She got a rescue dog, a pit bull mix named Diesel, and she swore up and down that she was ready to take on the responsibility of a pet. Over time, I started to notice some concerning things. Kelly was often out late or away on trips, leaving Diesel with her friends or sometimes in a kennel for long stretches. I know that having a pet can be challenging, but I always felt like she was more interested in the idea of having a dog than actually caring for one. Diesel didn't seem like he was getting the attention or exercise he needed, and I'd often hear that Kelly had to cancel plans or push things back because Diesel was too much work. Still, I didn't push the issue too much. I figured she was learning as she went along and would eventually get a routine. But then came the situation that changed everything. A few weeks ago, Kelly called me and told me that Diesel had hurt his leg. I asked her what happened, and she said that Diesel had been acting strange for a couple of days and was limping, but she didn't think it was a big deal. She explained that he'd been running around with some friends at the park and may have just twisted it or sprained it. She said she was going to wait a few days to see if it healed on its own. I was really worried because I know how easily injuries can get worse if not taken seriously, so I encouraged her to take him to the vet. But Kelly insisted that it was just a minor injury, and she didn't want to spend the money. A week passed, and Diesel's limp got worse. Kelly finally took him to the vet, and it turned out he needed surgery for a torn ligament in his leg. The surgery was going to cost $3,000, which is a lot, but Kelly didn't have the money. She called me and said that she didn't know what to do because she couldn't afford it. She told me that she was really upset and felt guilty, but she didn't want to lose Diesel. She asked if I could help her out and pay for the surgery. I was taken aback. I know that it's hard when pets get hurt or sick, and I do love Diesel, but I also know that Kelly's lack of responsibility with him had led to this situation in the first place. She'd never taken him to the vet for checkups on time, she never kept up with his vaccinations, and she didn't follow through with the training I suggested when she first got him. Now, here she was, asking me to bail her out when the dog's injury was clearly a result of her negligence. I tried to explain my concerns to her. I told her that I cared about Diesel and wanted him to be okay, but that I didn't think it was fair for me to pay for something that could have been prevented with proper care. She immediately started crying, telling me how much she loved Diesel and how she couldn't bear the thought of losing him. She kept saying that if I didn't help, she didn't know what she would do and that Diesel would be in pain and potentially lose the ability to walk properly for the rest of his life. I could see how upset she was, but I still felt conflicted. I knew it would be tough for her, but I also felt like this was her responsibility and she needed to face the consequences of her actions. I told her I couldn't help her with the surgery, especially since I had warned her several times about how much effort and responsibility owning a dog took. She got angry and accused me of being cold-hearted and unsympathetic. She said that if I truly cared about her and her dog, I would help her out in a time of crisis. We argued for hours. Kelly kept pushing, saying that I had the money to help and that it was just a dog to me, but everything to her. She said she wasn't asking for much, just a loan, or for me to pay a portion of the surgery. But I held firm, repeating that I didn't think it was my place to fix her mistakes. I also told her that if I helped this time, it would set a precedent for her to ask me every time something went wrong with Diesel, and I couldn't keep doing that. Eventually, she hung up on me, and I didn't hear from her for a few days. When she reached out again, it was to tell me that she had found a way to pay for the surgery through a payment plan at the vet, but that she was still angry with me for not helping. She said that she couldn't believe I would turn my back on her like that, especially since I had helped her out in the past with other things like moving and some smaller loans. She also told me that our parents were really disappointed in me for not stepping up and being the responsible older sibling when she was in trouble. Now I feel like the bad guy. I love Diesel, and I know Kelly must be devastated about what happened, but I also think this is the consequence of her being irresponsible with her pet. I've been trying to be firm in my decision, but it's hard not to feel guilty, especially with her guilt tripping me and our parents getting involved. So, AITA for refusing to help my sister pay for her dog's surgery after her own negligence caused the situation? Should I have just helped her out because she's family? Or am I right to stand my ground and let her deal with the consequences of her actions? AITA for refusing to let my friend borrow my car after he totaled his own? I, 28M, have a close friend, Jake, 29M, who has been a part of my life since college. We met through a mutual friend group, and over the years, we've become very close. We've supported each other through a lot, and he's one of the few people I truly trust. He's always been there for me, so when he asked for a favor recently, I initially didn't think twice about it. That is, until everything went down, and now I'm questioning whether I was too harsh. So here's the situation. A few weeks ago, Jake was in a car accident. He wasn't injured, thank God, but his car was totaled. He told me the accident was entirely his fault. He wasn't paying attention and ended up rear-ending another car while on the highway. His insurance was barely covering the damages, and he didn't have enough to buy a new car. He told me that he would need a car to get to work, especially since his job wasn't close to his apartment, and he didn't want to take public transportation. I understood that, and as a friend, I wanted to help him out. Here's where the problem started. Jake asked if he could borrow my car. He said it would be temporary, just until he could find a new vehicle, and that it wouldn't be more than a couple of weeks. He promised to take good care of it, return it in perfect condition, and that it wouldn't be an issue. I was hesitant, but I agreed to let him borrow it after he convinced me he would be careful. He's a responsible guy, so I thought it would be fine. The first few days, everything seemed okay. Jake was grateful, and he kept telling me how much he appreciated me helping him out. I would check in with him every so often, asking if everything was going smoothly, and he assured me it was. But a week later, I got a call from Jake. He was in a panic, saying that something had happened to the car. Apparently, he had been out with some friends, and they were on their way home when the car broke down. According to Jake, it was a mechanical issue, something to do with the engine, but he wasn't sure what. He said he had to leave the car on the side of the road and called a tow truck to get it to the nearest mechanic. At first, I didn't think much of it. Things like this happen, and I figured it was just an unfortunate situation. But then the mechanic told me that the damage to my car was far worse than just a simple engine issue. After looking over the car, the mechanic confirmed that my car had sustained some serious damage to the transmission and other key components. The repairs were going to cost me at least a few $1,000s. This wasn't something I could just brush off, especially since I had been saving up for a vacation and other life expenses. I was also furious because Jake hadn't mentioned any of this when he called me. He just casually mentioned the breakdown, but didn't mention the extent of the damage. I called Jake immediately, asking for more details about what had happened. He seemed incredibly defensive and told me that the mechanic was exaggerating the issue. He assured me that it wasn't as bad as they said and that he would take care of everything. But when I pressed him for more details, he admitted that he had been driving the car recklessly and had taken a turn too quickly, which caused a part of the transmission to malfunction. He said he didn't want to admit it to me because he didn't want to get me angry, but that he'd pay for the repairs. He assured me that he was working on getting the money together. At that point, I was beyond frustrated. I felt betrayed. He knew I had trusted him with my car, and instead of being responsible, he had been careless and caused serious damage. I wasn't angry that things happened. It's part of life, but I was angry that he hadn't been upfront with me about the situation from the start. I would have preferred honesty over him trying to downplay the damage. I told Jake that I needed to take the car to another mechanic to get a second opinion, and that I would need him to pay for the repairs once I had an estimate. He said that he would, but the next few days went by, and I didn't hear from him. I reached out again, and he told me that he hadn't gotten the money together yet, but would definitely have it soon. At this point, I was getting really frustrated. It had been a week since the incident, and I had no clear timeline for when the car would be fixed or when I could expect payment. Then, things took an even worse turn. Jake called me one evening, sounding frantic, and told me that he couldn't pay for the repairs at all. He said that his financial situation was worse than he had let on, and that he didn't have enough saved up. He asked me if I would just forgive the debt and let him off the hook. I was in shock. The car was an important asset to me, and it was a significant amount of money to repair. I couldn't just pretend like nothing had happened. I told Jake that I couldn't just let it go. I appreciated his honesty, but this was a serious issue, and I needed him to take responsibility. He said he would try to get a loan or borrow the money from friends, but I still felt uneasy. The whole situation had just become so uncomfortable. I wasn't sure if I could trust him anymore, and I couldn't keep putting my financial future at risk just because he was in a tough spot. A few days after that conversation, I went to pick up the car from the mechanic to see how much it would cost to repair it. I had already decided that I couldn't afford to let Jake borrow my car anymore. I texted him to let him know that I was going to need it back and that I couldn't let him continue using it since it wasn't just about the repairs anymore. It was about trust. I told him that I was sorry, but I couldn't put myself in this position again. He didn't take it well. He said that I was overreacting and that I was being unreasonable. He told me that I was making him feel guilty for something that was an honest mistake. I ended up having to cut the friendship a bit short for a while. He's been avoiding my calls, and we've only exchanged a few messages since. It feels like things are tense between us, and I can't help but feel guilty for not trusting him with the car anymore. On one hand, I feel like I did what was necessary to protect myself, but on the other hand, I can't shake the feeling that I might have overreacted or been too harsh. So, AITA for refusing to let my friend borrow my car after he totaled his own? AITA for telling my friend I don't want to be friends anymore after they accused me of being selfish for not letting them borrow my car? I, 27F, have a friend, Lucy, 26F, who I've known for years. We met in college, and we hit it off pretty quickly. We've always had a good, if sometimes complicated, friendship. Over the years, I've helped her out a lot. I've loaned her money, helped her move multiple times, and even covered for her at work when she needed a day off. I've always been there for her, and I like to think that I'm a good friend to her. But lately, things have started to feel one-sided. Lucy has been asking more and more for help, but I feel like she doesn't return the favor, and she's been taking advantage of my generosity. The final straw for me came about a week ago when she asked if she could borrow my car. Now, here's the thing. I've had my car for a few years, and it's not a luxury vehicle, but it's reliable, and I depend on it for commuting to work, running errands, and general day-to-day stuff. I don't let people borrow my car lightly, especially not for extended periods of time. I have always been a bit protective of it because I've had bad experiences in the past where people damaged my stuff or didn't take care of it. So when Lucy asked if she could borrow it for a few days, I hesitated. She explained that her car had broken down, and she needed something to get to and from work while hers was being fixed. She said she'd be careful with it and that it would only be for a few days, but I still felt uneasy. I knew she had a habit of not being as careful with other people's things as she should be, and I didn't feel comfortable handing over my car for a few days. I told her I wasn't able to lend it to her this time. Lucy was immediately upset. She told me I was being selfish and that she had always been there for me when I needed help, and I was turning my back on her when she needed something from me. She said that I didn't care about her and that she felt like I was always making excuses when it came to helping her. She brought up a couple of times when I'd asked her for small favors in the past, saying that I owed it to her to return the favor and let her borrow my car. I tried to explain my reasons calmly, telling her that I just wasn't comfortable with her borrowing my car, especially since I depended on it so much. I said I understood that her car was broken, and I felt bad for her, but I didn't feel that it was a good idea for me to let her use mine. I also pointed out that she had a habit of borrowing things and not returning them in the condition she received them. She didn't like hearing that, and she got even angrier, accusing me of overreacting and being too attached to my car. At this point, I was frustrated. I felt like she wasn't respecting my boundaries, and she was trying to guilt-trip me into doing something I wasn't comfortable with. I tried to stand my ground, but the more I explained myself, the more she insisted that I was being a bad friend and that I should care more about helping her when she was in a tough spot. She kept saying that if the roles were reversed, she would have lent me her car without hesitation. Eventually, I told her that I wasn't going to argue about it anymore. I told her I wasn't comfortable with her borrowing my car, and I left it at that. She seemed really hurt and said she would think about our friendship and whether or not she could keep it going if I wasn't going to support her in her time of need. A couple of days passed, and I thought things might blow over. But then Lucy texted me, telling me that she was really upset about how I had treated her and that she couldn't understand why I wouldn't just help her out. She told me that I had always been there for her before, but now I was acting like I didn't care about her at all. She said I was selfish and cold-hearted, and that she didn't know if she wanted to continue being friends with someone who couldn't even help her when she was going through a rough time. I sat with that message for a while. I thought about our friendship and realized that this wasn't the first time Lucy had made me feel like I was being taken advantage of. There had been other instances where I felt like I was doing all the heavy lifting in our relationship, where I was the one always helping her, and she was the one constantly taking without offering anything in return. I remembered all the times I'd helped her with money when she was broke, all the times I'd let her borrow things, and how I'd been there for her when she was in a tough spot. But every time I needed something, even just a little support or help, it always felt like she was either too busy or just didn't care. I felt this wave of frustration and resentment build up. I realized that I was always the one giving, but she was never the one offering anything back, even in small ways. She never took my boundaries seriously, and I was starting to feel like a doormat. The guilt-tripping, the emotional manipulation, the one-sided nature of our friendship, it all hit me at once. I realized that I had been making excuses for her behavior for way too long, and I didn't want to keep being the person who always gave and never received. So, after thinking it through, I made the decision to text her back. I told her that I understood she was upset, but that I felt like our friendship had become unhealthy. I told her that I had always been there for her, but I felt like I was always the one putting in the effort, and I couldn't keep doing that. I told her that her constant demands and guilt-tripping were too much for me, and I needed to step back from the friendship. I said that I couldn't continue being friends with someone who didn't respect my boundaries or appreciate the help I had given. I told her that I wasn't saying this to hurt her, but I needed to prioritize my own well-being, and that meant ending a friendship that was draining me. I wished her the best, but I told her that I didn't want to continue being friends anymore. She didn't respond right away, but when she did, it was with a long, angry message calling me every name under the sun. She told me I was selfish, ungrateful, and that I would regret cutting her out of my life. She said I had no idea what it was like to be in her position and that I was just throwing away a friendship for something as small as not lending her my car. It stung a little, but honestly, I felt a sense of relief. I realized I had made the right choice, and the weight of the toxic friendship was finally starting to lift. Now, I'm feeling a bit unsure. I've been second-guessing myself and wondering if I made the right call. Maybe I was too harsh, and maybe I should have just helped her out. But then again, I've been putting up with her behavior for so long, and I don't know if it was worth continuing a friendship that made me feel so small. So, AITA, for cutting off a friend who I felt was taking advantage of me? Should I have just been more understanding and lent her my car, or was I right to stand my ground and walk away from the friendship? AITA for not supporting my friend after she chose to drop out of school to pursue her dream job? I, 28M, have a close friend, Natalie, 27F, who I've known for nearly 10 years. We went to college together, and despite a few ups and downs, we've stayed friends. Over the years, I've always considered her to be a bit impulsive, especially when it comes to making big decisions, but I've always been there to support her when she needed it. She has always been passionate about her career ambitions, but she's never been the most practical person when it comes to planning her future. A few months ago, Natalie told me she wanted to drop out of her master's program in graphic design. She had been working on her degree part-time while holding down a full-time job, and things were starting to get tough. The classes were demanding, and she was struggling to balance everything. But the big reason she wanted to leave school was because she was offered a job at a local startup. The job, according to her, was her dream job, and it paid well enough to sustain her financially. She claimed that the company had an exciting vision and that they loved her portfolio, and she was eager to jump in full-time. At first, I was genuinely happy for her. It's always great to see friends pursuing their passions, and I know how hard she worked on her portfolio to land this opportunity. But then, things started to feel off. Natalie didn't seem as concerned about the potential risks involved in leaving school so abruptly. She had only 1 year left to finish her master's degree, and dropping out meant losing the investment she'd already made in her education. She didn't seem to care about that. She was so enamored by the idea of working for this startup that she wasn't thinking about the future consequences. I tried to have a conversation with her. I told her that while I was excited for her, I thought she should finish her degree. A master's in graphic design would open up so many doors for her in the future, and the startup job might not be as stable or long-term as she was imagining. I also pointed out that a degree could give her leverage in the industry and would serve as a safety net in case the startup didn't work out as she expected. Natalie didn't take it well. She said that I was being negative and that I was just trying to hold her back because I didn't understand her vision. She said that the startup had the potential to grow, and she didn't want to be stuck in a classroom anymore. She accused me of not trusting her judgment and not supporting her in her decision. At this point, I felt really frustrated because I wasn't trying to hold her back. I just wanted her to think more carefully before making such a big decision. She kept insisting that I was being unsupportive and that this was the opportunity of a lifetime. She told me I was overthinking it and that people didn't always follow the traditional path to success. She said she had faith in herself and didn't need a degree to make it in the industry. She went on to say that I had always been the practical one and that I didn't understand the value of taking risks. She asked me how I would feel if I were in her position. If I had the chance to work for my dream company, would I let something as insignificant as a degree hold me back? I was really taken aback by how defensive and dismissive she was. I was genuinely concerned about her decision, but she was acting like I was trying to crush her dreams. We ended the conversation with me telling her that I still thought she should finish school, but that I would support whatever decision she made. A few weeks later, she officially dropped out of school. She was so excited about the startup job, and she couldn't wait to start. I tried to be supportive, but I still had lingering doubts. I knew that this could work out for her, but I also knew how risky it was. She had no backup plan, and if the startup failed or didn't live up to her expectations, she would be left with nothing. Her plans seemed so impulsive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't being realistic. Fast forward to today. It's been about 3 months since she dropped out, and things are not going as smoothly as she expected. The startup is struggling financially, and they've had to scale back some of their projects. Natalie has been working long hours and dealing with a lot of stress. She's still living paycheck to paycheck, and she's had to borrow money from her parents a couple of times to make ends meet. The job isn't what she thought it would be, and she's starting to feel frustrated and uncertain about her future. A few days ago, she called me, clearly upset. She said that the company was cutting back on her hours and that she wasn't sure if the job was going to last much longer. She admitted that maybe dropping out of school wasn't the best decision, but she wasn't sure how to get back on track. She asked me for advice on what to do next, and honestly, I didn't know how to respond. I wasn't going to say, "I told you so," but I couldn't help feeling like she had made this bed for herself. I gently suggested that she consider finishing her degree and looking for another job, maybe something more stable, but she wasn't thrilled with the idea. She kept saying that she didn't want to go back to school because it felt like a failure, but I couldn't help but think that going back was her best option. Now, she's upset with me again. She told me that I was being judgmental and that I wasn't really being a friend. She said that I was acting like I was better than her because I had taken a more safe route in life and that I should be more supportive of her journey. She said that I was trying to force her back into a box and that I didn't understand the risks she had taken. She also accused me of holding her decision against her, which I honestly didn't think I was doing. But now she thinks I'm just waiting for her to fail so I can say, "I told you so." I've tried to tell her that I don't want her to fail and that I do want the best for her, but I'm still worried. I can't help but feel like she made a rash decision. And now that things aren't going perfectly, she's scrambling to figure out what to do next. I don't want to be the person who says, "I told you so," but I can't ignore the fact that I feel like I was right all along. So, AITA for not fully supporting my friend's decision to drop out of school to pursue her dream job, especially now that things aren't going as planned? Should I have just supported her without question, or was I right to be concerned? AITA for confronting my sister after she started using my personal stuff without asking? I, 29M, have a sister, Rachel, 25F, who I've always had a decent relationship with, though we've never been particularly close. We're not estranged, but we've also never been best friends. Growing up, we shared a lot of things, but as adults, we both moved into separate apartments, and I thought things would be different, more independent with clearer boundaries. For context, I'm a bit of a minimalist. I don't have a lot of things, but I take good care of the things I do own. I've always been particular about my stuff, whether it's my clothes, gadgets, or even food. I value the things I buy for their quality and the fact that they serve a specific purpose in my life. Rachel recently moved into a new apartment in the same city, and we've been seeing a lot more of each other. I didn't mind this at first, but over the past couple of months, I've noticed a strange pattern. She started using my personal items without asking. At first, it was small stuff like taking a bottle of my shampoo or my favorite mug when she came over. I'd let it slide, thinking maybe she forgot to bring her own things, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But soon, I started noticing bigger things disappearing. My gaming console, my headphones, and even my kitchen equipment. I started to feel like she was taking advantage of my hospitality. The final straw came a couple of weeks ago when I came home to find my new electric razor missing. I use it every day, and it's a relatively expensive one that I had only bought a few weeks ago. I searched around the apartment, and when I couldn't find it, I called Rachel. She answered, and after a couple of minutes of back and forth, she admitted she'd borrowed it because she didn't have time to go buy one herself. I was furious. I've always tried to set clear boundaries with her about using my things, and she had crossed a line. I told Rachel I didn't appreciate her taking my stuff without asking, and that she needed to return the razor immediately. She brushed it off, saying, "It's just stuff, don't worry about it." But I was already fed up. I told her that I wasn't okay with her helping herself to my belongings whenever she felt like it. I told her I'd lend her something if she asked, but taking things without permission was not acceptable. Rachel's response was defensive. She told me that I was overreacting, that I was being too uptight, and that she didn't see what the big deal was. She said, "You have so much stuff, and you barely even use half of it. It's not like I'm taking anything important." I tried to explain that it wasn't about the value of the items. It was about respect for my personal space and things. I've never gone into her apartment and taken things without asking. So why should she think it's okay to do that to me? She didn't seem to get it. She apologized, but it felt insincere. She promised she wouldn't do it again, but I still felt hurt. Since then, things have felt awkward between us. I've noticed that whenever I see her, she acts like everything's fine, but I can tell there's tension. It's like she thinks I'm being unreasonable and overreacting, while I feel like she's not respecting me or my things. A couple of days ago, I ran into her at a coffee shop, and she mentioned that she was coming over to hang out at my place. I was fine with that, but then she casually asked if she could borrow my Bluetooth speaker because hers was broken. I immediately said no. She looked at me like I was insane, and she asked, "Are you seriously still mad about the razors?" I told her that I wasn't mad, but I was serious about setting boundaries, and I wasn't going to let her take my things anymore. She sighed and said that I was being petty and that she'd never ask me for anything again. I didn't feel like I was being petty, but at that point, I was getting tired of defending myself, so I just told her that if she wanted to keep our relationship civil, she needed to respect my space and belongings. After that, Rachel didn't reach out for a couple of days, and I started wondering if I'd made the right call. I know she's always been a little forgetful and impulsive, but am I being too harsh by setting boundaries so strictly? Should I have let it slide and just kept letting her borrow stuff? I've always thought that family should be close and supportive, but now I feel like she thinks I'm treating her like an outsider. To make things more complicated, our parents are now involved. They called me a couple of days ago to tell me that Rachel had been upset about our argument and that I was being too hard on her. They both said that she was struggling with her new apartment and felt overwhelmed, and they thought I should be more patient with her. They said I should apologize for being so rigid and that I should just let her borrow my stuff because it's family. Now I'm stuck. Part of me feels guilty because I do care about Rachel, and I don't want to push her away. But on the other hand, I feel like my personal boundaries are being trampled, and I don't think I should apologize for wanting to keep my things to myself. I've always been the more responsible one in the family, and I feel like I'm constantly asked to accommodate everyone else while my needs are ignored. So, AITA for not supporting my sister and confronting her about using my personal items without asking? Should I have let it go and just accepted that this is part of being a family? Or am I justified in standing my ground and enforcing my boundaries? AITA for not supporting my best friend's career decision because it involves moving across the country? I, 29M, have a best friend, Kyle, 29M, who I've known since high school. We've been through everything together, graduations, breakups, jobs, and all the other major milestones. We've always had a solid friendship, and we genuinely trust and support each other in everything. Or at least, that's what I thought until recently. A few months ago, Kyle came to me with some big news. He had received an offer for his dream job in a city on the other side of the country. It's a job he's been working toward for years, and when he told me about the offer, I could tell how excited and overwhelmed he was. It's a great opportunity, and he would be working in a field he's incredibly passionate about. I was happy for him, of course, but something about it didn't sit right with me. We live in a smaller town, and while we both joke about how much we want to get out of here, I always imagined us building our futures here. I've got a steady job, a house, and my family's close by. In my mind, this area is where I'd always be. Kyle, however, has always been a bit of a dreamer. He's talked about moving away for years, and even though we've had plenty of conversations about how we'd likely be in different places at some point in our lives, I never imagined it would happen so soon. I guess I thought I had more time to adjust to the idea. After he told me about the job offer, I was really conflicted. I wanted to be happy for him, but at the same time, I couldn't shake the feeling that him leaving would mean the end of our friendship as we knew it. I mean, we're best friends. We've been through everything together, and the idea of him being so far away just didn't sit well with me. I told him I was happy for him, but that I was worried about how things would change between us. He brushed it off and said that it would be fine, that we'd stay in touch, and he would visit when he could. But deep down, I was scared. I'd watched him get excited about things before only to lose interest or find another opportunity that was better. I guess part of me thought this could be one of those times. A few weeks later, Kyle officially accepted the job. He gave his 2-week notice at his current job, and I started to feel this knot in my stomach. I didn't know how to handle it. Our group of friends, which includes a few other people from high school, all had different reactions. Some were excited for him, while others were more apprehensive. A lot of people were supportive, but I could tell they didn't feel the same way I did. They didn't have the same history with Kyle as I did. At some point, I just blurted out to him, "I don't think you should go. I don't think it's the right decision." He looked at me, clearly shocked. I could tell I had caught him off guard. He asked what I meant, and I told him that I thought he was rushing into something that might not be as amazing as it seemed. I told him I didn't want him to move across the country only to get there and realize it wasn't what he expected, or worse, that he'd feel isolated and disconnected. I also mentioned that he wasn't really considering how much it would affect the people he was leaving behind, specifically me. He was quiet for a minute and then said, "I thought you'd be more supportive. This is my dream job. This is what I've been working for. How can you not be happy for me?" I explained that I was happy for him, but that I just didn't think moving so far away was the best thing for him right now. He didn't have family there, and we both knew how expensive it would be to maintain long-distance friendships. I was scared for him, scared that he'd be miserable and regret the decision. But it wasn't just about him. I was also worried about myself. I didn't want him to leave. I didn't want to lose my best friend, and I didn't want to feel abandoned. We had spent so many years together, and the thought of him being across the country felt like too much of a distance, not just physically but emotionally. After that conversation, things became a little tense. He didn't seem to understand my concerns, and I didn't feel like he was acknowledging how difficult this would be for me. He started pulling away a little, not responding to texts as quickly, and not initiating conversations. It felt like he was trying to distance himself from me, maybe because I had been so vocal about my doubts. It all came to a head when I told him that I didn't think we'd be able to stay as close after he left. He got really upset and told me that I was being selfish. He said that I was trying to make him feel guilty for making a life-changing decision and that I was only thinking about myself. He said that if I was really his friend, I would support him no matter what, and that me saying things like we wouldn't be as close was only making it harder for him. I couldn't really argue with that. I knew that a lot of my feelings were coming from a selfish place. I didn't want things to change, and I was scared of losing my best friend. But I also felt like he wasn't considering how his decision would affect the people he was leaving behind. I've been here my whole life, and the idea of him leaving so abruptly felt like a betrayal. It was hard to shake the feeling that he was prioritizing his dream over the friendships he had here. The argument left us both upset. I tried to apologize for being too harsh, but it felt like the damage was already done. Kyle's departure date is coming up soon, and every time we talk, it feels like we're just going through the motions. We've had some awkward conversations, and I can tell he's not as excited to share details with me anymore. He's made it clear that he's going, and I need to either support him or step aside. I've been thinking a lot about whether I was wrong in how I reacted. I know it's his life, and he should make decisions that are best for him. But at the same time, I feel like I've lost my best friend, and I don't know how to handle that. The idea of him being so far away, especially with everything we've been through together, just feels like too much. So, AITA for not supporting my best friend's career decision because it involves moving across the country? Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.